001. This is a journey into one of the most disturbing cases ever recorded in the history of the Ozark Mountains. Before we start, I invite you to let us know in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're hearing this narration. We're curious to discover which locations and at what times of day or night these documented accounts are being received. 023. Back in the autumn of 1895, when the Ozark Mountains remained largely untamed wilderness, a settlement called Hollow Creek vanished from existence overnight. The Eldridge clan, 17 souls altogether, disappeared without leaving a single trace behind, just cold hearths and half-prepared meals remaining. No bodies ever surfaced, no graves were ever dug, and no explanation was ever verified. 051. The disappearance of the lost Hollow clan stands among the most baffling mysteries in American frontier history. What follows is a compilation of historical documents, personal testimonies, and official inquiries spanning 70 years. Those documents were archived at the Missouri Historical Society until 1964, when they got transferred to microfilm and subsequently misplaced during some facility renovations. 118. The following account has been assembled from newspaper clippings, diary entries, and recorded statements from those who dared to investigate the quiet that descended upon Hollow Creek. The settlement occupied a narrow valley positioned between Mount Judea and Compton in what is now Newton County, Arkansas. 139. The only way in was a treacherous mountain trail that became completely impassable during winter. This isolation probably explains why the disappearance went unnoticed for nearly 3 weeks. By that time, the trail had gone cold, in both the literal and figurative sense. Sheriff Thomas Layton of Harrison wrote these words in his official report dated December 3, 1895. 202. Upon arriving at the location referred to as Hollow Creek, we discovered the settlement entirely deserted. The livestock pens were empty, though feed remained in the troughs. The homes showed no indications of struggle or rushed departure. Personal belongings, including clothes and family heirlooms, were still in their places. The community hearth held cold ashes estimated to be 3 weeks old. 226. Despite extensive searching of the surrounding region, no human remains were discovered. What became of the Eldridge clan and those connected with them? Why would an entire community abandon their dwellings without taking their belongings? And why has every subsequent investigation into this matter resulted in dead ends or, in some instances, tragedy? The story of Hollow Creek begins not with its conclusion, but with its origins. 252. And to grasp what transpired during those pivotal days of October 1895, we must first understand who the Eldridges were and what motivated their choice of such profound isolation. Jeremiah Eldridge was born in 1842 in eastern Tennessee, the third son of a reasonably prosperous tobacco farmer. County records from Greene County, Tennessee indicate the family owned a modest but productive farm of approximately 80 acres. 320. Jeremiah received basic instruction at the local parish school until age 14, when his father decided his academic education was complete. According to family correspondence preserved by distant relatives, young Jeremiah showed an early fascination with geology and the cave formations common to that region, frequently disappearing for hours to explore the limestone hollows near his family home. 345. When the Civil War erupted, Jeremiah, like numerous young men from Tennessee, joined the Confederate Army. Military records show he served under General Nathan Bedford Forrest, taking part in several major engagements including the Battle of Shiloh. His service record indicates he was briefly held after the war but was released under the general amnesty. 409. What stands out about Jeremiah's military service is a gap in his documented whereabouts from June 1863 to February 1864. A letter from his commanding officer mentions he was assigned to special duties of a confidential character, the specifics of which were never detailed in official records. 432. This period would later become important for researchers investigating the Hollow Creek mystery. Following the war, Jeremiah came back to Tennessee only to find his family farm burned and his parents dead, casualties of the chaotic violence that marked the conflict in that area. His 2 brothers had perished in battle at Gettysburg and Nashville respectively. 456. Now alone and without property, Jeremiah worked as a laborer and trapper for several years before building himself up as a fur trader with modest success. County records show he wed Rebecca Hollister in 1868, a schoolteacher from a neighboring county whose family had also experienced losses during the war. Rebecca's diary, later recovered from the abandoned settlement, describes their early relationship. 524. Jay is not the same boy I knew before the war. There's a quietness about him now, a constant watchfulness. When he talks about his time in service, he repeats the same stories all the veterans tell, but sometimes at night I overhear him speaking in his sleep about what they discovered and the voices from beneath. When I question him in the morning, he says he has no memory of such dreams. 548. By 1870, Jeremiah had started buying land in the remote parts of the Ozarks, beginning with a 120-acre parcel in what would later become Newton County, Arkansas. The land deed, preserved in county records, characterizes the property as mountainous terrain offering limited agricultural potential, and includes a notable circular depression of limestone formation. 614, approximately half a mile east of the proposed home site. What attracted Jeremiah to this particular valley remains a matter of speculation. The soil wasn't especially fertile. The location was remarkably isolated even by frontier measures, and the nearest town of any consequence was nearly 20 miles away across difficult terrain. Rebecca's diary entries from this time suggest she was initially reluctant to relocate to such a remote place. 643, Jay insists this place has been waiting for us. When I express worry about the children growing up so far from society and education, he tells me some knowledge is better gained away from the influences of a changing world. The Eldridges arrived at what would become Hollow Creek in September 1870, first living in a temporary shelter while they built their permanent cabin. 711, Rebecca's diary captures those early days. The valley has its own kind of beauty, though the silence here carries a weight I've never felt before. The closest neighbor is half a day's ride away. Jay spends much of his time exploring the hollow east of our camp. He returns carrying strange rocks and sketches I cannot comprehend. 732, he says little about his activities there, but he appears more at peace than I've seen him since before the war. By 1875, the settlement had grown to include 3 cabins. Jeremiah and Rebecca now had 4 children: Isaac, born 1869, Martha, born 1871, Samuel, born 1873, and Ezekiel, born 1875. Rebecca's sister Catherine and her husband William joined them in 1872, constructing a cabin roughly 50 yards from the main house. 805, William's brother Thomas arrived in 1874 with his wife Eleanor. A letter from William to his parents in Tennessee, dated June 1873, offers some insight into the early settlement. The valley provides adequately, though not abundantly. Game is plentiful, and we've established modest crops of corn and beans. Jeremiah knows these mountains better than men who have lived here their whole lives, even though he'd never set foot in the Ozarks before we came. 836, he has an odd way about him, keeping detailed maps and spending days at a time in the hollow. He claims to be studying its unusual rock formations. The children are forbidden from playing there, which suits us fine because the place has an unwelcoming atmosphere. By 1895, the settlement had expanded to 5 cabins arranged in a semicircle around a central clearing. 9 o'clock, the main house belonged to Jeremiah and Rebecca, who by then had 4 adult children, 3 of whom had spouses and children of their own. Isaac had married Sarah Collins, a woman from Harrison he met during one of the settlement's infrequent supply trips. They had 2 children, Joseph, age 4, and Ruth, age 2. 921, Martha had married Richard Thornton, who had joined the settlement with his parents in 1888 after meeting Jeremiah on a supply trip to Springfield. They had 1 daughter, Elizabeth, aged 7. Samuel remained unmarried, while Ezekiel, the youngest at 20, was described in Rebecca's journal as troubled in mind and spirit. 943, the 5th cabin belonged to the senior Thorntons, Albert and Constance, who joined the settlement in 1888 with their 3 children, Richard, who later married Martha Eldridge, Victoria, and Benjamin. By 1895, Victoria had married Samuel Eldridge, though according to Rebecca's journal, the match was more practical than passionate. 1007, Rebecca Eldridge maintained a detailed household journal that was found intact during the initial investigation. Her entries provide the most complete record of everyday existence at Hollow Creek. The settlement was largely self-reliant, growing corn, beans, squash, and potatoes. They raised chickens and hogs, hunted deer and small game, and preserved food for the severe winter months when the mountain trail to Harrison became impassable. 1037, Rebecca's journal entries indicate the settlement had established a routine that varied little over the years. Sundays were kept as a day of rest and religious observance, with Jeremiah leading the community in Bible readings and hymns. The nearest church was too far to attend regularly, and no minister ever visited this remote settlement. 1102, the isolation was nearly complete and apparently intentional. Her final entry, dated October 12, 1895, reads, "Frost arrived early this year. Samuel came back from hunting with 2 deer, which should sustain us until spring bartering. Ezekiel remains troubled by the dreams. Martha mentions the children heard voices from the hollow again last night. Jeremiah insists it's just the wind. 1127, I'm not so sure. The look in his eyes contradicts his words. He knows more than he reveals. Jay has called for a family council tomorrow after Sunday reading. He says there's a matter that can no longer be postponed." This journal entry is particularly noteworthy for its mention of voices from the hollow, a detail that would become significant in later investigations. 1153, the hollow in question was a limestone depression roughly half a mile east of the settlement, known locally as Echo Hollow because of its unusual acoustic qualities. According to an 1872 surveyor's report, commissioned by the county to update property records, Echo Hollow was a nearly perfect circular depression in the limestone bedrock, approximately 150 feet in diameter and 65 feet deep at its center. 1224, the walls descend at a consistent angle of about 40 degrees. The acoustic properties are remarkable, with even whispered words carrying distinctly from one side to the other. Local guides refused to enter the depression, citing superstitious beliefs. The settlement's routine appeared unremarkable based on Rebecca's journal entries from the months preceding the disappearance. 1247, they maintained their crops, prepared for winter, and engaged in the usual activities of frontier life. Yet subtle indications of growing tension appear throughout her writing. Mentions of Ezekiel's night terrors become more frequent starting in July 1895. References to unusual sounds coming from the direction of Echo Hollow appear with increasing frequency from August onward. 1313, what disrupted this quiet existence? The first substantial clue comes from a letter written by Martha Eldridge to her friend in Springfield, Emma Cartwright. The letter, postmarked September 28, 1895, was discovered among Emma's belongings after her death in 1932. In it, Martha wrote, "Dearest Emma, I pray this letter reaches you and the children in good health. 1339, how I miss our conversations and your steady guidance during these troubling times. Father's behavior grows stranger by the day. Since coming back from his last trip to Harrison, he talks of little except the need for vigilance. He's taken to carrying his rifle even to family meals. Mother says it's just his war memories resurfacing, but I notice how she now locks the cabin door even during daylight. 1405, the children feel the tension, though we try to protect them. Little Elizabeth woke crying 3 nights ago, claiming she heard someone calling her name from the darkness beyond our window. Richard insists it was just an owl or fox, but the expression on Father's face when I mentioned it at breakfast suggested otherwise. Ezekiel's condition grows worse. 1426, he barely sleeps, and when he does, he wakes up screaming about those who wait beneath. Father forbade him from going to the hollow after finding him there at dawn last week, sitting motionless and staring at the center of the depression. Ezekiel claimed he was listening to the instructions. I confess, Emma, that for the first time since we established our home here, I find myself longing for the safety of town walls and the company of neighbors who aren't family. 1456, Richard suggests we might visit Springfield after winter, but Father is unlikely to permit it. He speaks increasingly of the corruption of towns and the need for our isolation. I must end this letter now as Richard is waiting to take it to Harrison on the supply run. I will write again when I can. 1516, your devoted friend, Martha. What happened during Jeremiah Eldridge's trip to Harrison in mid-September 1895? Town records indicate he visited on September 14 to buy supplies and sell furs. The proprietor of the general store, Harold McCreary, later told investigators that Eldridge seemed unusually agitated and purchased more ammunition than usual. 1543, McCreary also recalled Eldridge having a heated exchange with a stranger at the establishment, a well-dressed man whom locals didn't recognize. According to McCreary's statement, preserved in Sheriff Layton's files, Mr. Eldridge came in around midday, as was his custom twice yearly. He conducted his usual business, trading furs for coffee, salt, ammunition, and other supplies they didn't produce in their settlement. 1610, I noticed he requested twice the usual amount of rifle cartridges, which I commented on. He replied something about better to have and not need. He seemed distracted, checking the door whenever someone entered. Near the end of his transaction, a gentleman entered whom I'd never seen before, well-dressed, city clothes, not local. 1633, this man showed particular interest when he heard me address Mr. Eldridge by name. He approached and asked whether Mr. Eldridge was from the settlement at Hollow Creek. When Eldridge confirmed this, the stranger inquired specifically about the limestone depression on his property. The conversation grew heated, though they kept their voices low. 1657, I couldn't hear most of it, but I distinctly heard the stranger say something like, "The survey was quite clear about what was found." And Eldridge responded, "Nothing was found because nothing was there to find." The stranger then said something about, "The department still has an interest," which seemed to greatly disturb Eldridge. 1716, he left shortly after, earlier than his usual pattern of staying for a meal at the hotel. This stranger's identity remains unknown. Some speculated he might have been a Pinkerton detective or a federal agent investigating Civil War veterans with questionable pasts. Others suggested he could have been a land speculator interested in the valley where the Eldridges had settled. 1740, a more unusual theory proposed years later by researcher James Thornton, was that the man represented a geological survey or mining interest. Following his return to Hollow Creek, the settlement's behavior changed. According to the sparse evidence available, Rebecca's journal notes increased hunting expeditions, the preservation of additional food stores, and the repair of cabin walls and roofs, all typical preparations for winter, but conducted with what she described as uncommon urgency. 1810, an entry from October 1, 1895 reads, "Jay called the men together today. They spoke in low voices by the edge of the clearing for nearly 2 hours. When Richard returned, he would tell me nothing of what was discussed, only that father has concerns about strangers possibly coming to the valley before winter sets in. 1831, we are to keep the children close to the cabins at all times. The hollow is now forbidden to all." Then came October 12, 1895, the date of Rebecca's final journal entry mentioning the family council planned for the following day. After this, the historical record falls silent until November 2, when Jacob Turner, a trapper from Jasper, stumbled upon the abandoned settlement while seeking shelter from an early snowstorm. 7 p.m., Turner's account, given to Sheriff Layton and preserved in the county records, describes a scene both ordinary and deeply unsettling. "I'd been working my trap lines when the storm blew in earlier than expected. Knowing the Eldridge place was nearby, I headed for it, hoping for shelter till the weather broke. I approached just before dusk. 1921, first thing I noticed was the absence of smoke from the chimneys, which struck me as odd given the bitter cold. I called out but received no answer. The cabins stood open to the elements, which no frontier family would permit, especially with winter coming on. Inside the main house, I found a table set for the evening meal, with food partially prepared but abandoned. 1945, a pot of stew had boiled dry on the hearth. In one corner, a child's doll sat propped against a rocking chair, as if waiting for its owner's return. A Bible lay open on a side table, a pair of reading spectacles folded neatly upon it. I checked each cabin in turn, finding similar scenes of ordinary life suddenly interrupted. 2008, in one, a half-mended shirt lay with needles still stuck in the fabric. In another, a checkers game appeared to have been abandoned mid-play. The root cellar was well stocked with preserved food. The barns contained hay and feed, though no livestock remained except for a few chickens that had gone feral. 2029, their horses and mules were gone, but oddly, most of their tack remained hanging in the stable. Most disturbing was the silence. Anyone who spent time in the mountains knows they're never truly quiet. There's always the wind or birds or small creatures moving in the brush. But that evening, as I moved among the cabins, calling for any sign of the family, the silence felt complete, as if the very air was holding its breath. 2056, I spent an uneasy night in the main cabin, barring the door, though there was no sign of threat or danger. Come morning, I set out for Harrison as soon as the snow allowed travel to report what I'd found. Turner reported no signs of violence, no blood, no indication of struggle or conflict. The settlers' few horses were gone, but most of their possessions remained, including items of significant value like Rebecca's silver hairbrush and Jeremiah's prized pocket watch, which was found on the mantel. 2126, the initial investigation by Sheriff Layton and his deputies found little to explain the community's disappearance. They discovered no graves near the settlement, no bodies in the surrounding woods. The most disturbing detail was the complete absence of any trail. The recent snowfall had covered whatever tracks might have existed, leaving investigators literally and figuratively cold. 2153, Sheriff Layton's official report contains this observation. The absence of any sign of violence or struggle suggests the settlers left voluntarily. Yet the abandonment of valuable possessions and winter supplies defies logical explanation. No frontier family would leave food, tools, and shelter behind with winter approaching unless under extreme duress. 2217, yet we found no evidence of what might have caused such a hasty departure. We conducted a thorough search of the surrounding area to a radius of approximately 3 miles, focusing particular attention on the limestone depression described in prior surveys. This geological feature, while unusual, revealed nothing of note beyond a single set of footprints partially filled with snow leading to its center and then returning to the settlement. 2247, the age of these tracks could not be determined with certainty. It is the determination of this office that the Eldridge settlement has relocated for reasons unknown. Given the absence of any evidence of criminal activity and the challenging conditions of the approaching winter, this investigation is suspended pending new information. 2308, local newspapers reported the mystery with lurid fascination. The Harrison Daily Times ran the headline, "Entire Settlement Vanishes Without a Trace on November 10, 1895. The article speculated that the settlers might have fled from Indian trouble, despite the fact that relations with indigenous peoples in the area had been peaceful for decades. 2331, a follow-up piece on November 17 quoted an elderly Cherokee man living near Jasper. That hollow has been known to our people for many generations. We call it the place where the earth listens. Our hunters avoided it. Those who camped nearby reported dreams of voices calling them to dig deeper into the ground. Your white settlers were not the first to disappear from that valley. 2355, they will not be the last. This quote is particularly interesting as it establishes that Echo Hollow had a reputation that predated European settlement in the area. Archaeological surveys conducted in the region in the 1950s found evidence of several indigenous settlements dating back centuries, but noted a curious absence of artifacts within several miles of Echo Hollow, despite the area's suitability for habitation. 2400 hours 24, as winter descended on the Ozarks, the investigation stalled. Spring brought renewed efforts, but no new evidence emerged. The settlement stood empty, a silent testament to an unexplained tragedy. Eventually, the county auctioned the land and possessions in 1897. The cabins were dismantled for lumber, and Hollow Creek began its slow fade from public memory. 2400 hours 48, local legend persisted, however. Hunters and trappers avoided the area, claiming it felt unwelcoming or that they experienced unusual dreams when camping nearby. A surveyor's assistant reportedly went missing briefly in 1908 while working in the vicinity, only to be found wandering disoriented 2 days later with no memory of where he had been. 25:13, the story might have ended there, relegated to local legend, had it not been for Walter Eldridge, a distant cousin of Jeremiah's who learned of the disappearance in 1923. A professor of American history at Washington University in St. Louis, Walter became intrigued by this lost branch of his family tree. His academic training and resources allowed him to approach the mystery with methodical rigor that had been absent from the original investigation. 25:41, Walter's research began with county records and newspaper accounts, but his most significant discovery came when he located Emma Cartwright, the recipient of Martha Eldridge's final letter. Though elderly by 1923, Emma recalled Martha's correspondence with clarity. She showed Walter several earlier letters that had not been part of the official investigation. 26:06, in one letter dated July 1895, Martha wrote, "Ezekiel's condition worsens. The night terrors leave him exhausted, and during waking hours, he speaks of little besides what he calls the watchers in the hollow. Father forbids discussion of it at meals, but mother worries." The Thornton boy now reports similar dreams. 26:29, he woke the household 3 nights past, screaming about the voices from below. Most disturbing is that he and Ezekiel describe identical visions, though they have not discussed them with each other. Walter became particularly interested in Echo Hollow, the limestone depression mentioned in Rebecca's journal. In his own journal, which was later found among his effects after his disappearance in 1924, Walter wrote, "Local guides refused to take me to the hollow. 26:59, they cite dangerous terrain, but their eyes betray deeper fears. One old-timer in Jasper told me that even before the Eldridge settled there, the place had a reputation. The Cherokee apparently avoided it, calling it the place where the ground listens. A similar reluctance exists among the current population." 27:22, when I inquired at the general store about hiring a guide, conversation stopped, and I was firmly but politely discouraged. Despite the warnings, Walter eventually found Echo Hollow in April 1924. His journal describes it as a perfectly circular depression about 50 yards across and 20 feet deep. The limestone walls create strange acoustic effects. 27:47, whispers from one side can be clearly heard on the other. At the center stands a single dead oak tree, its branches twisted into shapes that seem almost deliberate. The silence here is oppressive, as if the air itself is holding its breath. Walter made 3 visits to Echo Hollow, each documented in his journal. 28:07, during his second visit, he reported finding something embedded in the trunk of the dead oak, a metal object that he pried loose and identified as a button from a Confederate uniform. Given Jeremiah Eldridge's military service, this discovery seemed significant. On his third visit, according to his final journal entry dated May 17, 1924, Walter planned to excavate around the base of the tree where he had noticed disturbed soil. 28:38, his journal entry reads in full, "Returned to the hollow today. The weather is clear, though unusually cold for May. I've brought digging tools to investigate the area around the oak tree. The soil there appears to have been disturbed in the past, though not recently. The vegetation pattern is unnatural, a circular area approximately 6 feet in diameter where nothing grows." 29:02, the silence remains the hollow's most unnerving feature. Even on this spring day, with birds calling from the forest all around, once I descend into the depression, all external sound seems muted, as if heard through thick glass. Yet sounds generated within the hollow are unusually clear and seem to linger. 29:25, I've set up camp at the hollow's rim rather than returning to Jasper. I want to observe the acoustic properties at night to determine whether there might be a scientific explanation for the voices mentioned in Martha's letters. Midday now. I've begun excavation around the base of the oak. The soil is loose and appears to have been previously dug up and replaced. 29:49, approximately 8 inches down, I've encountered a layer of flat stones arranged in what appears to be a deliberate pattern. I'll continue carefully. Afternoon. Beneath the stone layer, I found a small metal box approximately 6 by 4 inches. Military issue by the look of it. It's locked, but the lock is rusted. I should be able to open it with my tools back at camp. 30:11, the sound is back today. Not wind, not an echo, something else. His journal ends abruptly after this line. 3 days later, Walter's rented room in Jasper was found vacant with his belongings still in place. His journal was discovered on the nightstand, open to that final entry. His excavation tools remained at the hollow along with his camping equipment, but no sign of Walter himself or the metal box he described. 30:38, local authorities conducted a brief search but found no trace of Walter. Given the parallels to the original disappearance, some speculated that whatever fate befell the Eldridges had claimed their distant relative as well. The case was eventually closed, with Walter presumed to have met with an accident in the rugged terrain. 31:01, the contents of Walter's research notes preserved in university archives reveal his developing theory about the Hollow Creek disappearance. He had become convinced that Jeremiah Eldridge selected that specific valley for settlement because of prior knowledge about Echo Hollow, knowledge possibly related to his special duties during the Civil War. Walter had discovered a tantalizing reference in military archives to a special detachment led by a Colonel Hargrove in 1863, which included a Corporal J. 31:35, Eldridge among its members. The detachment was dispatched to investigate reports of unusual geological formations in Tennessee that might yield strategic minerals for the Confederate war effort. The reports from this expedition were either lost or deliberately destroyed during the war's final days. Walter's notes speculate. 31:55, is it possible that whatever Eldridge encountered during that expedition led him to seek out similar formations after the war? The timing of his land purchase in the Ozarks corresponds to a geological survey of the region published in 1869, which makes brief mention of unusual circular depressions in the limestone bedrock of northern Arkansas. 32:18, the mystery lay dormant again until 1952, when Dr. Margaret Winters, a folklorist from the University of Arkansas, began collecting oral histories of the Ozarks. Several of her interviews included mentions of the Hollow Creek disappearance, which had by then evolved into regional legend. One account came from Thomas McCreary, the elderly son of the general store proprietor who had interacted with Jeremiah Eldridge before the disappearance. 32:47, Thomas, who was a child in 1895, claimed his father had shared additional details that never made it into official reports. According to Thomas's recorded testimony, Pa didn't tell the sheriff everything. Said some things were better left unsaid in official statements. But he told me years later when I was grown about what really happened with Eldridge and that stranger. 33:13, the man wasn't just passing through. He'd been asking about Eldridge for days before they met at the store. Asked specific questions about the hollow on Eldridge's property. Wanted to know if anyone had reported unusual sounds or experiences near it. According to Pa, after Eldridge left, the man lingered at the store. 33:34, he showed Pa papers identifying himself as a representative of the Department of the Interior Geological Survey Division. Said they had an interest in certain limestone formations in the Ozarks, particularly those with unusual acoustic properties. The man asked if Eldridge ever mentioned finding anything in the hollow. 33:54, artifacts, unusual rocks, openings in the limestone. Pa said no, but he got the impression the man didn't believe him. Before leaving, the stranger said to Pa, "That man and his kin are sitting on something they don't understand. It won't end well." About a week after Eldridge's disappearance was reported, that same stranger returned to Harrison. 34:17, he joined the sheriff's follow-up search party. Pa found that mighty suspicious, but when he mentioned it to Sheriff Layton, he was told to keep such thoughts to himself. The stranger was never mentioned in any official reports of the investigation. Dr. Winters also interviewed Esther Turner, the daughter of Jacob Turner, who discovered the abandoned settlement. 34:37, Esther revealed that her father had not been entirely forthcoming with authorities. Pa told us he found something in the hollow that he didn't report, she said in her recorded testimony. A circle of stones that hadn't been there when he trapped that area before. And inside the circle, the ground had been disturbed, as if something had been buried and then dug up. 35:02, he also told us, though he'd never admit this to any official, that he spent 2 nights at the settlement, not just one as he claimed. On the second night, he said he heard what sounded like voices coming from the direction of the hollow. Not normal voices, he said, but something that spoke directly into his mind. 35:22, He packed up and left at first light and never returned to that valley again. 4 years after, he'd wake up in the night, claiming he could still hear those voices calling him back. These new accounts prompted Dr. Winters to visit Echo Hollow herself in the summer of 1953. She brought along a graduate student, Raymond Carter, and equipment to document the site photographically. 35:45, their expedition yielded several significant findings. First, they located the dead oak tree mentioned in Walter Eldridge's journal, though by 1953 it had fallen and was mostly decomposed. Around its former base, they discovered a small metal box containing what appeared to be journal pages written in a tight, cramped script. 36:06, the water damage made most of the text illegible, but certain phrases could be deciphered, including repeated references to those who watch from below and the voices that are not voices. Dr. Winters's field notes include this transcription of the fragments that remained legible, arrived at the hollow as instructed. 36:27, the formation matches the description from the Tennessee expedition. The acoustic properties are identical. Colonel H believes these formations are not natural but constructed for a specific purpose. The voices become clearer at night. They speak of things buried deep, of knowledge from before. The same promises made at the Tennessee site. 36:50, Colonel H insists we must continue. The excavation reached 30 feet below the surface today. The limestone gives way to a different material, unlike any rock formation documented in geological literature. It absorbs sound completely, creating a sensation of pressure on the eardrums. 3 men refused to continue the excavation after the dreams began. 37:14, Colonel H arrested them for desertion, though we are not technically a military operation anymore. The War Department officially disbanded our unit, but the colonel insists our work is vital to the Confederacy. We found the opening today. It extends downward at a sharp angle. The air emerging from it is cold and carries a faint odor of metal and something organic yet unfamiliar. 37:40, Colonel H plans to descend tomorrow. Survivors regrouped at Rendezvous Point. Only 5 of us remain. Colonel H is not among them. The expedition is officially terminated. We sealed the entrance as best we could and disguised the excavation site. Agreed that the location must never be revealed. Dreams persist despite distance from the site. 38:03, the voices know my name now. They speak of future sites where their kind can be found. One is in the Ozark Range. I will investigate when the war ends to ensure it remains sealed. Some things must stay buried. The handwriting matched samples of Jeremiah Eldridge's script from county records, suggesting these were fragments of a journal he kept during or after his Civil War service. 38:29, if authentic, they indicate that Jeremiah had prior experience with geological formations similar to Echo Hollow, possibly during his unexplained absence from regular military duty in 1863-64. More significantly, Dr. Winters and Carter found evidence of excavation along the hollow's eastern rim, not recent work, but something that had been done many decades earlier and since overgrown. 38:57, their photographs show what appears to be the remnants of a shaft dug into the limestone, roughly 6 feet in diameter and of indeterminate depth. In her field notes, Dr. Winters wrote, "The hollow itself presents several geological anomalies that warrant further investigation. The limestone formation does not match typical Ozark karst structures." 39:20, Carter noted that the circular depression appears almost too perfect to be natural. The acoustic properties are indeed remarkable. A whisper from one side carries perfectly to the other, while sounds from outside the hollow seem muffled once you descend into it. Most disturbing is the sensation both Carter and I experienced independently while within the depression. 39:45, a subtle but persistent sense of being watched, despite the obvious absence of anyone else in the vicinity. This subjective experience aligns with descriptions in both Walter Eldridge's journal and the fragments we discovered. The excavation site on the eastern rim appears to have been deliberately filled in and disguised at some point in the past. 40:07, the vegetation pattern suggests this occurred decades ago, possibly around the time of the Eldridge disappearance. Clearing away the surface growth revealed a shaft lined with timber supports in an advanced state of decay. We were unable to determine its depth as debris has filled in much of the opening, but the remaining visible portion extends at least 12 feet vertically before angling sharply to the east toward the center of the hollow. 40:37, Dr. Winters planned a return expedition with university backing and proper archaeological equipment. Her proposal to the department, dated September 1953, outlined plans for ground-penetrating radar surveys and systematic excavation of the Eastern Rim site. The proposal was approved for the following summer. However, in a development that adds yet another layer to the mystery, Dr. 41:01, Winters abruptly withdrew her proposal in December 1953. She took a leave of absence from the university and, upon returning 6 months later, refused to discuss Hollow Creek or her research there. When Carter attempted to publish their preliminary findings, Dr. Winters actively opposed it, threatening legal action if he proceeded. 41:25, Carter, in a private letter to a colleague that surfaced after his death in 1986, wrote, "Margaret returned from her second trip to the Hollow a changed woman. She went back alone in November against my strong objections, saying she needed to verify certain measurements before winter made the site inaccessible. She was gone for 3 days. 41:46, when she returned to Fayetteville, she immediately burned her field notes and photographs. When I pressed her for an explanation, she would only say that some things should remain buried and that she would not be responsible for what might follow if our findings became public. I asked her directly what she found during her solitary visit. 42:06, she refused to answer, but her hands shook as she lit a cigarette, and Margaret was not a woman easily shaken. The only detail she would share was that she had found evidence of recent activity at the shaft site, suggesting someone else had been excavating there recently. The most troubling aspect was her insistence that we destroy the journal fragments we'd recovered. 42:31, when I objected on academic grounds, she became uncharacteristically emotional, saying, "They're still there, Raymond. Whatever happened to the Eldridges, to Walter, it's still there, waiting in the dark, and it knows we've been looking for it." Dr. Winters never published her Ozark folklore collection and requested that her recordings of interviews related to Hollow Creek be sealed in university archives until 50 years after her death. 42:57, she passed away in 1968, and the recordings were finally made available in 2018. Unfortunately, the reel containing the interviews with Thomas McCreary and Esther Turner was missing from the collection. The final chapter in the investigation of the Lost Hollow clan came in 1964 when James Thornton, a graduate student researching his thesis on frontier communities, discovered county records that had been overlooked in previous investigations. 43:29, among these was a land survey conducted in 1872, 2 years after Jeremiah Eldridge established his settlement. The survey noted an unusual circular depression on the property and included a surveyor's comment that local indigenous guides refused to enter the area. More intriguingly, the survey mentioned evidence of prior excavation work of unknown purpose or origin. 43:56, this suggests that the hollow had been a site of interest even before the Eldridges arrived, raising questions about whether Jeremiah selected that particular valley by chance or if he was drawn there for specific reasons related to the hollow. Thornton also uncovered a partial inventory of items found in the abandoned settlement, which listed something not mentioned in previous accounts. 44:20, one leather-bound journal, pages removed, cover marked with unknown symbols, found beneath floorboards in main cabin. This journal was not among the items preserved from the investigation, nor was it ever officially logged into evidence. Sheriff Layton made no mention of it in his reports, suggesting either an oversight or deliberate omission. 44:41, perhaps most significantly, Thornton discovered a death certificate for Harold McCreary, the general store proprietor who had witnessed the encounter between Jeremiah Eldridge and the mysterious stranger. McCreary died on December 12, 1895, just days after giving his statement to Sheriff Layton. 45:02, the cause of death was listed as apoplexy, but a note from the attending physician mentioned patient exhibited unusual symptoms, including auditory hallucinations and extreme agitation in the 24 hours preceding death. Armed with these new discoveries, Thornton visited Newton County in the spring of 1964. According to his correspondence, he located Echo Hollow and spent several days documenting the site. 45:31, in his last letter to his thesis advisor, dated June 12, 1964, he wrote, "I've found something that may explain everything. A narrow crevice in the eastern wall, hidden behind vegetation. It extends deep into the limestone. I've acquired climbing equipment and plan to explore it tomorrow." 45:53, if my theory is correct, the Eldridges didn't leave Hollow Creek. They went deeper into it. Thornton was reported missing 3 days later when he failed to return to his rented room in Jasper. A search party found his camping equipment and notes at Echo Hollow, but no sign of Thornton himself. The crevice he mentioned was located but was deemed too narrow for adult human passage beyond a certain point. 46:15, the search was abandoned after a week. Thornton's thesis, incomplete at the time of his disappearance, proposed that the Eldridge settlement was not randomly placed but deliberately established near Echo Hollow because Jeremiah had prior knowledge of something significant about the location, perhaps related to his Civil War experiences or connections. 46:40, the thesis suggested that the voices mentioned in Rebecca's journal and Martha's letters might have been something more tangible than imagination, perhaps the sound of others already in the hollow, individuals unknown to most of the settlement residents. It further speculated that the excavation noted in the 1872 survey might have been Jeremiah's own work conducted in secret. 47:04, a particularly intriguing section of Thornton's draft thesis connects the Hollow Creek mystery to other historical incidents. The pattern of unusual acoustic properties followed by reports of voices followed by disappearances is not unique to Echo Hollow. Similar accounts exist in historical records from at least 3 other locations across the Appalachian and Ozark regions dating back to the early 19th century. 47:34, in 1834, a surveying party in eastern Tennessee documented a perfect circular depression in limestone bedrock with remarkable acoustic properties. The lead surveyor reported hearing voices unlike any human speech when camping near the site. 3 members of the party subsequently vanished while conducting measurements of the depression. 47:56, the official report attributed their disappearance to desertion. In 1851, a small mining operation in southern Kentucky was abandoned after workers reported hearing voices from the rock face. The mine owner documented unusual formations in the limestone that created unnatural acoustics. The operation ceased when 3 miners disappeared overnight, leaving their possessions and uncollected wages behind. 48:23, most relevant to the Hollow Creek incident is an 1863 Confederate military expedition to a location in eastern Tennessee that matches the description in Jeremiah Eldridge's fragmentary journal. Military records confirm that a special detachment led by Colonel Hargrove, including Corporal Eldridge, was dispatched to investigate an unspecified site of strategic interest. 48:49, of the 12 men who set out on this expedition, only 5 returned. Official records state they encountered Union forces, but personal correspondence from survivors mentions something in the hollow and voices that drove men to madness. What became of James Thornton? Like Walter Eldridge before him and the Lost Hollow clan before that, he simply vanished. 49:12, his research materials were archived at the university until 1968, when they were transferred to microfilm. During a reorganization of the archives in 1969, the microfilm went missing and has never been recovered. And so, the mystery of the Lost Hollow clan remains unsolved. An entire community of 17 people vanished without trace from a remote Ozark Valley in 1895. 49:40, those who have investigated their fate over the decades have met with obstacles, silence, or have themselves disappeared. What remains are fragments, journal entries, letters, testimonies, survey notes that hint at something beyond ordinary explanation, not supernatural perhaps, but certainly outside common experience. The limestone hollow with its perfect acoustics and evidence of excavation. 50:07, the references to watchers and voices, the strange behavior of Jeremiah Eldridge after his encounter with a mysterious stranger, the disturbed soil that Jacob Turner found but never reported. Echo Hollow itself still exists, though it now lies within private property and is inaccessible to the public. 50:30, satellite imagery shows the circular depression, just as described in historical accounts. The surrounding forest has reclaimed the land where the settlement once stood. No archaeological excavation has ever been conducted at the site. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this case is not what we know, but what has been systematically removed from the record. Dr. 50:54, Winters's destroyed notes and missing recordings, the disappeared microfilm of Thornton's research, the journal with unknown symbols that vanished from evidence. It suggests not just a mystery, but a concerted effort to keep that mystery buried. Local attitudes toward Echo Hollow remain one of superstitious avoidance. 51:16, even today, residents of Newton County are reluctant to discuss the location or the legend of the Lost Hollow clan. As one elderly man in Jasper told a journalist in 1957, some places just don't want to be known. That hollow, it keeps its secrets, and those who try to dig them up, well, the ground might just decide to keep them, too. 51:38, in the absence of definitive evidence, we are left with questions. Did the Eldridge clan flee from some threat, real or perceived? Did they fall victim to violence, their bodies hidden so well that no trace was ever found? Or, as James Thornton's unfinished thesis suggested, did they find something in Echo Hollow, something that had been there long before them, something that Jeremiah perhaps knew about all along? The limestone karst of the Ozarks is honeycombed with caves and underground passages, some extending for miles beneath. 52:13, the surface, many still unmapped. Is it possible that Echo Hollow connects to this subterranean world? And if so, what might have drawn the settlers into its depths on that October night in 1895? We may never know. The documents are fragmentary, the witnesses long dead, the physical evidence eroded by time. 52:36, each investigation has ended without resolution, often with the investigator themselves becoming part of the mystery. One final note bears mention. In 1977, a hiker in the area reported finding a child's shoe near where Echo Hollow was believed to be located. The shoe, weathered but identifiable as late 19th century manufacture, was turned over to local authorities. 53:04, tests determined it likely belonged to a girl of about 7 years of age, the same age Martha Eldridge's daughter would have been in 1895. The shoe was stored as evidence, but when researchers requested access to it in 1983, they were informed that it had been mistakenly disposed of during a cleanup of the evidence. 54:44, his manuscript was never published. According to his widow, Jenkins abandoned the project after a visit to Newton County in late 1998. She reported that he returned from the trip visibly shaken, destroyed his notes, and refused to discuss what he had discovered. When pressed, he would only say some things should stay buried. Jenkins died of a stroke in 2002. 55:08, among his personal effects was a small metal button from a Confederate uniform and a fragment of limestone with unusual markings that his widow described as not natural, like something had carved symbols into it. These items disappeared from Jenkins's study before they could be examined by experts. And so the silence around Hollow Creek continues, broken only by occasional whispers of those who remember the legend. 55:37, the Ozarks keep their secrets well. The limestone hollow remains a perfect circle in the forested hills where sounds carry strangely and the ground, some say, still listens. For those who find themselves near Newton County, near the forgotten path that once led to Hollow Creek, locals offer simple advice: listen to the silence. 56:01, and if the silence speaks back, do not answer. Do not investigate. Above all, do not dig. Because some mysteries are not meant to be solved, and some who vanish do not wish to be found.